Hi, I'm Tatiana,
And I'm Hannah.
and we're going to be doing a C2C. So I'll start with the first question. So Hannah, which resources did you grow up knowing a lot about, and which ones were you not really ever surrounded by?
I grew up in a very oil and gas heavy family, so definitely the most knowledgeable on that. My extended family is also very involved in farming and agriculture, so I have a bit of background in that. Otherwise, I know nothing about mining, fisheries, nuclear, anything outside of those two resources.
Right. Okay. Cool. Very cool. So then, how much were you associated with agriculture growing up? How much did you see it in your childhood?
I spent every summer out in Saskatchewan on the farm with my grandparents, so I got to grow up around it in that sense. But during the school year, not so much, but got to frolic through the fields
So
all
fun.
summer long. Yeah,
That's a dream. That's a dream. That's awesome.
It's the best place for a kid.
Yeah,
Set me free.
Yeah, honestly.
Eat all his crops.
That's awesome.
In your opinion, how do you think that we can do a better job of balancing environment with economics?
I think that's the thing. I feel like for me, balance is a huge thing. And I think that whenever there's too much of an extreme on one or the other side, eventually the pendulum will swing and it'll just, it's not really sustainable. So I think in terms of balancing economy and the environment, I think the first thing to do is have the conversation and say it doesn't have to be one or the other. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. You can have a solution that you can work towards that encompasses, people and, the economy and the environment, and have that be that multifaceted approach. So I feel like first things first is just having the conversation around it. So I feel like a lot of the time, just the discussion itself, whether it's on social media, whether it's in the office space or whatever, some people find that even the notion of those two things are already in their heads, here and here, right? So I think that first things first is just having a conversation and just talking about ways that you can kind of marry the two. I also think that looking at other international examples is a great way. I know that obviously not everything is a one-size-fits-all approach, and you can't just, take something from one side of the world and apply it here perfectly. But I think looking at different places, a lot of places in Europe, actually, they have really cool systems where they have a lot of economic prosperity as well as a more ingrained, appreciation for the land, and the way they live with it is a lot more harmonious and not as much, an exponential growth, kind of consumeristic lifestyle. So I think just looking more at different worldviews, different perspectives, and how we can use those as education to kind of show us that it is possible to have both. I think that's what I would say.
I really love that.
Thanks.
Yeah. Not one versus the other.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, sorry, my questions. They went away. All right, so next question for you is, was there ever a big conversation regarding these topics at your university, and how do you see them being talked about, in social media or just amongst your friends or in general?
A bit hard for me to talk on the university sense, since I haven't really been on campus yet. So far in my couple semesters, there hasn't been a huge conversation surrounding natural resources. Right. I did think that there was a lot of relevance with them in the content that we were learning between biology and chemistry and physics and all of those very natural sciences. But I think because it's a bit of a controversial topic depending on your demographic, they try to avoid it almost instead of kind of dealing with the elephant in the room and having an educational conversation about it. In the media, definitely being in Calgary heavily influences the amount of oil and gas related content that we see, but with SFC and Canada Action, I think it's really great that it starts to, or it aims to kind of balance that between other industries as well, and kind of diversifies that conversation. I think that's really important to have an appreciation for all the other natural resources across Canada.
I love that. I agree. I feel like just having, even SFC, having people from across Canada has such a big impact, right? seeing like how we can all have different perspectives but still come together with the same kind of common goals. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. They even I think it was on our Instagram, maybe they posted that map of different resources across Canada, and I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even take into account that some places in Canada do actually have nuclear energy, and I don't know, I've never really thought about those industries. I thought that was a really interesting way to put it into perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Even when I was actually living in Ottawa, I realized that, I think Lynn actually showed me this app, but it showed the power grid of Ontario, and at most points, like either 50 to 60% of the power grid is from nuclear.
No way.
And I was just like, what? No one even like knows that.
Yeah.
You know, it's just such a cool thing to like see that behind the scenes. There's just so much going on that you don't even realize in your day-to-day life, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot that's not even discussed. I feel like the conversation ends up being so focused on oil and gas because it is like Canada's biggest controversy.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, not, but in that resource sector.
One of them.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
We just completely forget to talk about these other industries, like nuclear.
Yeah.
It's really cool. Intel, this and I had no idea. How like heavily used it is.
Yeah, exactly. Crazy.
And then I was kind of going to fire a similar question back at you as to how you feel that resources are portrayed in the media.
Oh, I would say, okay, well, I mean, in terms of mainstream social media, I think there's obviously a very one-sided, heavy, I guess, like, perspective on it. I think if you're just scrolling on Facebook or on Instagram or whatever, I think you'll see a lot more. I mean, it depends on like the kind of like things you follow, but I think you'll see a lot more, especially in our age demographic, a lot more of pages or posts or people who are more so talking about the negatives of resources, but not even in general. I think just like even oil and gas specifically, there's a lot of like only on one side in a lot of the media where it's like it's just across the board not good. And then I don't really see a lot on other resources as much. I think if I had to really do a deep dive on the internet to find like news about those kind of things as frequently as I see stuff about oil and gas and like abandoned wells and like that kind of thing on social media. But I guess then I'm sure if someone, let's say, who was an oil and gas worker in Calgary, I'm sure their social media page would be a lot different than mine. I'm sure they'd be following other pages, like other places that would have a more other-sided approach to it and like talking more so about the positives of it, because that's just how life is, different sides to everything. So I think that's why it's kind of important to try and diversify your news outlets and like what you're taking in. Even I have to do a better job of doing that and not just looking at like one place for like my news or one place for like what I'm taking in as social media content, so I can kind of get a better, I guess, widespread view on what those things really are. And yeah, I don't know, I think that it's also important to have that conversation on social media about resources in general, not just oil and gas, because I think, again, like probably when I was in Ottawa, I doubt many of my friends knew that 60% of Ontario's power grid sometimes was nuclear, right? Or even like things like mining and how that works and like what things we actually get from mining. I think there's a big disconnect sometimes between the idea of what resources is and then like that ideal versus like day-to-day life. I feel like if we're going on, or in our generation, you're using your phone, you're using things that obviously are from certain things, certain products, but we're not actually seeing like the backstory of those objects on social media at all, really, right? So I think there's a bit of a disconnect sometimes between what we do in our day-to-day life and like how we see that reflected in social media and in the news. But I do think that a lot can be done by just kind of diversifying where you're looking for, I guess, your content and your news. So.
And it's also streamlined to fit to your opinion. Yeah. So if you're pro oil and gas, you'll probably only really see articles and news related to other pro oil and gas.
Yeah.
It's hard to find opposing views that are also factual.
Exactly.
Of it, exaggerated on both sides.
Yes, 100%. But there's so much just that extremism and just a lot of I guess, sensationalism on both sides
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely.
So, but, yeah. Still. Okay, yeah, still going. All right.
Just needed a quick snooze.
Exactly. All right, so my last question for you is, why do you think that discussions over natural resources and projects, things like that, are so controversial and polarizing in Canada? And then how can we kind of better change this or go about that?
Kind of a great segue, because I think it has to do a lot with both sides of the argument getting blown way out of proportion.
Yeah.
I believe that at the end of the day, both sides actually have the same goal. We want all the same things.
Yeah.
We want a strong economy, and we love our beautiful country, and we want to keep it that way.
Yeah.
Oil and gas producers are not trying to destroy the environment, and neither are completely pro-green energy people.
Yeah.
Like, we all want a great quality of life,
Yeah.
and we want to preserve what we have. And I think it's so one side versus the other, and I really believe that the media has a lot to do with that.
Yeah.
And they just add fuel to the fire. It's
yeah.
like you're either right or you're left. Like, there's no
black or white.
there's no gray area, and people get really defensive because it feels like it's so one side versus the other. And I think it's really hard for people to realize that we all have the same goals at the end of the day.
Yeah.
How we get there is obviously going to look a bit different, but I think like good education on both sides is kind of the cure to that. Like you say, who here knows about nuclear and how that actually works? Who actually knows about the life cycle of a well? Who actually knows how wind and solar and what goes into those, and the pros and cons? Like, it's hard to actually have good education on those. And I think misinformation makes people really fired up about things that aren't necessarily true. When the truth gets twisted, then people feel very strongly. Nobody wants to hear that some big oil giant is, wrecking one of the last wetlands in Alberta. But if you look into it, it's easy to find that that's not necessarily what's actually happening, what's true. And I think also, renewable resources are on their way out, and all these companies are well aware of that. And they're simply trying to push through until we have better access to great technologies. Like, I don't think that any of them are actually opposed to good development and more environmentally friendly resources. And I think that makes a big difference.
100%. Yeah, I love that.
And my last question for you, what do you think is important that people should know about Canadian resources?
That's a good question. I think for me, one thing that'd be important to know is that it's never a one-sided story. I think that it's really easy to follow a certain narrative and follow that through to the end, and just that, again, like you said, plays into those like opposing sides and that like very polarized conversation dynamic. So I think that it's important to know that, like, while, for example, on one side, there are so many natural resource companies who are doing their best to, as you say, like, get better and get more, if they're environmentally sustainable and regenerative and work the best way they can while kind of merging out in order to leave room for more renewable energy. But there's also some companies still that aren't doing that, and there are still some companies that aren't really doing the best they could be doing, or things, there's a lot of, I guess, there's two sides to that story as well. So I feel like that's important for people to know, is that it's never just all good or all bad. Just like with other resources, that it's not all bad. Like, even I did a recent interview with a forestry company, And just a lot of the stats and a lot of the things they told me, it painted this picture that really made me aware of the fact that there's so much more that goes into resources, and there's so much more that we don't really see in our day-to-day life. Even, for example, like sequestered carbon in the forestry realm, that can be, even in like these tables or even in the books that we read, that's all sequestered carbon, because it's carbon that's stored in there from those trees that's now in this object that's not emitting, and that comes from forestry products being made, right? So it's like there are so many different ways that you can have an environmental benefit as well as a benefit, like having this table for our C2C SFC purposes. So I think that just I don't know, I think being aware that there are always sort of the balance between it's not all good, it's not all bad, that's really, really important. And that I think also helps us to kind of come to the middle and see that you're not seeing someone as like opposing you. They're not your enemy. They're not like 100% against you, unless they are in one random case, which would be unfortunate. But I think for the most part, most people who want to have a better future for Canada, they're able to there's something in them, something in both of you and all of you that wants something for the common good, right? So that's important to remember, that it's neither good nor bad, 100%. And then I think also an important thing for resources to remember is that resources is such like a multifaceted idea, and I didn't really delve very deep into resources until I worked with SFC. I kind of just like I knew of like what our resources were, but I didn't really do a lot of research on them. I didn't really think about them consciously that much. But even resources, an example, like for our day-to-day uses, like a toothbrush or a contact solution or medication that you need, or your shoes, or all those things, those all come from resources, or like your house, or like the paper that you use to write, or a Kleenex box or whatever, like things like that. Those are all resources, not even including energy resources, right? So I think that it's cool, and it's helpful to look at the different resources we have and where they come from, and how there is probably room for improvement in a lot of them. Right? But as Canadians living here with a great quality of life, we have a lot of that good quality of life owing to our natural resources, whether that's, our energy that we get, our electricity in our houses, or whether that's even resources as like food and agriculture, and just our farmers and that resources. Soil is one of our most important, crucial resources in Canada. It's like one of almost, I would say, the most important resource, for us. So I think just being more cognizant of where things come from, how they got here, whether it's like how this food got into your plate, or how like thinking just more about like, oh, how did I get this object? I think that will tie you a bit deeper into how those things got there, and whether that, let's say, if you disagree with the way that was made, then you can make the choice to choose something else. But I think just being more aware of where they come from, and being appreciative and grateful for the fact that we have all these great high quality products and sources of energy and food and whatever else that we get to experience, and I'm very, very lucky and privileged to experience in Canada. So yeah, that's my long answer for that question. Yeah.
No, that's so true. And really being conscious consumers.
Yeah.
Like, if I don't know, if you don't agree that your body lotion is being made overseas, there are options for companies in Canada. Exactly. So it's how it aligns a bit with your personal values, and I guess actually doing your research from the sounds of it.
Yeah, exactly. So, well, that was great. That was a great interview. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
I'm Tatiana, and I am with SFC.
I'm Hannah, and also SFC.